Hey everybody, welcome to Now That's Debatable. This is your host, Fantastic Assad, and I am joined with my trusted co-host, Triple A the Humanist. And we are doing a re-record, a react, I guess, if you will, to the video we did last week, because we had some audio issues where it was echoing incredibly bad. As always, live chat's up on the screen. We're going to do some quick audio testing as we kick off, and if you have any questions or comments, please add them to the chat.
Are you in the same stream that I am? Okay, now I see it's live. All right, cool. Uh, Guys, we decided to redo the episode because last time it got kind of all fucked up. I was trying to leave it up, and I saw this one comment, and it said something like the audio issues makes this unwatchable, and I was like, damn. Yes, I just went ahead and took it down. So, but this was a good video to react to, so we wanted to get this out. So we're going again. Round 2.
So as far as I can tell, audio sounds okay. My only concern is that we might have issue when playing the video. Hopefully not. We're going to find out momentarily.
All right.
But you sound okay. I sounded okay. I'm usually pretty quiet in the intro, and the music's pretty loud, but that's okay. That's typical. We're back to normal stuff. Everybody should be able to hear me okay. I could hear you okay. And if we can hear this video okay, we're in business.
Unless you're raised in a Baptist Sunday school, you probably think that if you believe in God, you should be able to explain why. Luckily, Christians and other philosophers have been answering this question for over 2,000 years. Evidentialism tries to argue for God by giving evidence of supernatural events. For example, a lot of Christians think the resurrection of Christ can be historically proven because there were a lot of eyewitnesses who all died for their faith, and generally people don't die for something they know isn't true. Sometimes people give evidence of supernatural things like demonic possessions, where people start speaking in languages they don't know, or near-death experiences where people see things outside their body that they shouldn't have been able to see. The moral argument is basically, objective morality is only real if God is real, but objective morality is real, so therefore God is real. Question, is cannibalism good or bad? I think it's good. I think it's bad. I think it's good. I think it's bad. Which one of them is correct? Now, I'm assuming you agree with this one. If you don't, please stay away from me. But how do you know that he's actually correct? How do you know that these aren't just different opinions? Our little friend here can only be objectively correct if there's a supreme authority that says cannibalism is bad.
Let's stop it right there. So he's already starting off on bad footing, right? Because it seems like he doesn't understand what objectivity is. He said something can only be good or bad unless there's a supreme authority that says it's good or bad. And if that supreme authority is a person or a being, like a conscious God, that's still just his opinion. That doesn't get you to objectivity. That's just not the way you get there. It's kind of like asking, like how much tuna does it take to make a chicken sandwich? Right? There's no amount of tuna that you could have to make a chicken sandwich because that's just not the ingredients. You don't get to objectivity by pointing to a all-powerful being, not the God. That's not how you get there. An objective method is an objective moral system is one that I described in a show thoroughly on several episodes, where it's based on how acts affect you in reality. That's an objective basis, not appealing to some supreme God or authority. You had any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've covered this in a few of our episodes with debating people live, and if you're opposed to this idea, or if you don't like the concept, feel free to email us and come on the show, but something that I think we both touted and argued is that adding God doesn't add objectivity to anything. And if you disagree with that or you don't quite understand it based off of the argument just presented by AAA, then maybe you don't quite understand objectivity either. And so, like, just like, I kind of always refer back into the times of the gangsters, like the real gangsters like Al Capone. And just because they had the most power doesn't mean they made the rules objective. Like that doesn't give you objectivity just because you're the one making the rules or you're the one holding people to certain standards, like, paying money for protection, that kind of stuff. Like, just because God gave you a list of rules or God, supposedly gave you this list of rules, doesn't make those rules objective. It makes them subjective to how God made them. So if you somehow still think that adding God equals objectivity, maybe look a little deeper into what objectivity is.
That supreme authority is what we would call God. The cosmological argument is basically that something must have caused everything else. Everything that happens has a cause, and that has a cause, and that has a cause. So where does this go? Does this go on?
He says everything that happens has a cause. And I know if you think about this on a surface level, it seems like this would be true. And I'm not saying that isn't true. I'm saying it's unsubstantiated. You have to prove that. And I don't know if reality would necessarily have a cause. I don't see how it could have a cause. Any cause that you could give reality would necessarily be circular. Because like whatever that cause is, if it's real, then it's part of reality. And which you're not explaining anything. You're saying the cause of reality is just reality. Do you see the problem? So I don't think that needs a cause. Well, maybe he would say everything that begins to exist has a cause. I'm sorry. So so I was kind of straw manning the argument. But even then, there could be something on the other side of the cosmos that I don't see that just doesn't have a cause. I don't know. And it just began to exist. Have no idea. But quantum fluctuations, they seem to be causeless. So
yeah, and I will point out something else here, just kind of in that same vein, is that something must have caused everything else. And by defining this as God or deity or however we're going to define it here momentarily, what we're doing is we're taking and I refer to this as kicking the can down the street a ways. And what I mean by that is it's kind of like you're taking all the clothes that you have that are on your floor that you need to wash and fold and put away properly, and you're shoving them in the closet and shutting the door. I would say that what you've done is you haven't cleaned the mess, you've just moved it a little further down the goal. You've moved the goalpost a little of what you're defining as clean. And by saying that something must have caused everything else, well, if everything is your perspective, then everything would include whatever you're about to say is the precluder of this, right? And so let's address Phantom's comment real quick. It says, isn't this a little like the atheistic agnostic definition, though? I mean, they're using objective incorrectly, but that doesn't mean that's what they're trying to express it. So there's a couple ways to define objectivity. Most people, when referring to morals and objectivity, are referring to something that exists outside of mind. At least that's how philosophical objectivity is defined. There is objectivity in the sense of we're trying to reach a goal. So we would say that we have an object in mind or a goal in mind. So, for instance, if AAA and I were to say that we were going to pool money together to become millionaires, right? We could say there are objective ways that we could do things to make that happen quicker. And by us not contributing any money to that pool, that would be an objectively worse way than contributing large amounts of money to that pool, right? And you could measure that based on what the goal is, and that goal being like have $1 million in like a bank account or whatever. In that sense. And we could do the same thing with, like, literally any scenario. Like, we could say, oh, our goal is to increase the human population to 10 billion people, right? So, as individual contributors to that goal, a good thing that we could do with that goal in mind, something that would be objectively better, would be having lots of kids.
So, Phantom, he added a clarification. He says, I understand what objective versus subjective means. They are using it wrong. What I'm saying is they are trying to say morals that apply to all humans. And if that's what they're saying, then I see no reason to appeal to a God, because you could describe a moral system that applies to all humans without that. You could, and it doesn't even have to be a good moral system. You could just say like whatever makes someone the most happy, right? That's the most moral thing. Then that would be, if that was what they mean by by objective, just something that applies to all humans, I think that makes their argument even weaker.
Yeah, I mean,
because that's a very
like,
easy
just
thing to
because
do
you
without a
can
God.
apply something to all humans, or even like potentially consequence something to all humans, doesn't make it by any means any closer to what they might call objective, even if it applies to everyone. Like, for instance, we all kind of, at least, all of us here probably are aware of what the Ten Commandments are. You could apply them equally across the board, whereas in the situation or the instance I gave earlier of like Al Capone, he was kind of controlling Chicago. You probably wouldn't say he was controlling the nation as a whole, whereas something like the U.S. government is much closer to being able to control and manipulate the nation as a whole. You could potentially say like that applies to all humans living in the United States, but it wouldn't apply to all humans, right? But you could make something up that applies to all humans just because, that there's no real reason to not be able to include them. For instance, you could just, like, for instance, all humans should give to charity when they are available or able to, right? Like, you could just say that's an applicable thing to all humans and it's moral, but that's not any closer to objectivity. So if that's the argument they're going to go with, I'd still say, A, you're right, they're using it incorrectly, and then B, if they're trying to apply it that way, they should just come up with a new method or wording to try to get there.
Also, a lot of apologists that have come on the show has failed at that when we talk about systems that apply to all humans. Like they consistently make exceptions for the ancient Israelites who did these, God commanded to do these wicked, awful things.
I think they're trying to express the idea that God holds all humans to his standard equally and call that objective. Yeah, I mean, if we go with that argument,
I could hold all humans to my standard.
But there's a couple problems with that. A, it's still to a subjectivity, which is the fact that there's a God.
But God.
B, God doesn't hold everyone to the same standard. Like we see time and time again, especially if you're talking about the Judeo-Christian God, the God of the Bible, that he definitely plays favorites. There are times, like he made a gamble with Job's life and literally destroyed everything that Job had, including his wife and children. Like, that's not holding people to the same standard, because he doesn't do that to everyone in the Bible. Or, when God says that David is a man after his own heart, that kind of stuff. Like, he clearly plays favorites. He has his own chosen people. Like, there's just a number of reasons why that doesn't happen. On top of that, it wouldn't make it, like, a good standard, so... God is the only one that could hold humans to the standards. I guess in an eternal sense, if a God is correct, he could ultimately judge people for the standard that he set. But it seems that we either don't have free will and we're doing things against his standard, or we don't have free will and we're doing things according to his standard because we don't have free will, or we have free will and we don't do things according to his standard. In any case, we're not doing things according to the standard that he wants. Otherwise, there would be no hell. So
I feel like we should get Phantom on the show to still man Christian arguments. He does a way better job than me, the apologist.
Agreed. By the way, your arguments are better in general than some of the average Christians that I've seen try to make the moral argument for God.
on forever? That's not possible. At some point, there needs to be a first cause of everything.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so he said so. There was a long break, so you may have forgot what he was saying, but he was talking about how something had to have a first cause, because you could say if there wasn't a first cause, then something caused that, which caused that, which caused that, which caused this infinite chain of causality, and he says that couldn't have happened. That doesn't violate any law of logic nor any known law of physics. There's no reason why you just couldn't have an infinite chain of causal events. So he's just wrong there. He says, Phantom put another comment, but he said, for sure, God doesn't hold everyone to the same standard, but that is a better argument, because in a way saying you are using objective wrong is a bit of a straw man arguing against the concept. Yeah, I guess I'd have to confirm what he means by objective, because I don't know if you remember Wes, and he'll be on the show next week, I believe. And when we were talking, he agreed to my definition of objective. And also the guy you invited on that you found on Facebook, Facade, what's his name? The Catholic guy?
Which one?
Yeah, I remember his name. The beauty's objective or whatever.
Angel.
Yeah, Angel. Yeah, he agreed to her out. So those are two Christians I know specifically that we've had on the show that agreed to our definition of objective, to the common definition of it, and also the bearded guy. I forget his name, but the bearded pastor who's come on like 3 times now.
Oh, Joe.
And yeah, I think he agreed with us as well. Maybe not. I have to go back and look at the conversation, but yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess I have to figure out exactly what he means by objective.
And this is back to my kicking the can argument that I made before we went on this tangent, is that we're just moving the goalpost or kicking the can, whatever you want to call it, where we say, like, well, something had to be the first cause, and whatever that is God, right? Well, like, if we're happy going back one step until we're not happy going back one step anymore, like, why? Like, where are we drawing this subjective line in the sand? Would you like me to continue, or do you need a...
No, I'm good. I'm just closing my blinds.
Everything else. There needs to be an unmoved mover, an uncaused causer, an unchanged changer. It needs to be eternal, because if it ever starts or stops existing, that's change, and it can't do that. It needs to be outside the universe, because everything in the universe...
Can we stop there?
Yep.
So he says, like, it needs to be uncaused cause. The wording the word Ben Shapiro used, unactualized actualizer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that can't apply to God, because there were points in time when God started doing things. And so, like, think about before he created the universe, he had the potential to create the universe, and then he does it, right? So that means that God can't be entirely actual. He has to have potential.
Yeah,
So,
and by the way, like, I see he said, and I may just be nuanced here, but he says unchanged changer, and then he says eternal. And I don't know, I assume he's referring to unchanged changer, but he says it after the word eternal. That means, like, by that, it's not something that can be changed, which is weird, so I assume he's referring to the unchanged changer. But in all accounts, God does change.
definitely.
I mean,
It causes a lot of theological problems to say otherwise.
Yeah.
Like you think about like the person of Jesus, right? Like the 3 persons, right? The Jesus character dies and then comes back. That's change.
Yeah, and
He's
on top of that, like, God's attitude, the state of the universe, his place in the universe, if you will, by embodying Jesus, if you're a Christian, or sending the Holy Spirit. Like, all of these things are changed, and they're all potential changed, right? Like, they're all potential until they happen. So even unless, like, you would say that, like, God did all these things simultaneously within his own time, he's still doing it within the framework of the time of the universe, right? So, like, he's still doing things that are bound in time to our universe's timeline. Because otherwise, God wouldn't have died, right? That's a thing that's strictly limited to things within our universe, or, like, at least humans in our universe, kind of. Not saying that other things can't die, but saying that, like, if there is no universe, there's nothing that can die in that universe.
Caused. It also needs to be all-powerful, because if it
Yeah, I don't understand that one either.
There is no reason for the creator of the universe to be all powerful. The creator of the universe only needs to be sufficiently powerful to create the universe.
can't be moved without it can move.
I cannot emphasize that anymore. This is just a failure in understanding philosophy.
Mr. Argument gets nowhere close to the Abraham and God.
Move anything else, that means it's all-powerful, and this is what we would call God. I don't get it. Okay, let's make it even harder then. Everything is a mixture of act, meaning what it is, and potency, meaning what it could be. For example, a baby actually is alive, and it could be an adult. An apple actually is red, and it has the potency to be eaten. So if you eat an apple...
It's gonna continue. You should wait 30 more seconds.
Okay, go ahead. All right, go ahead.
You're actualizing its potency to be eaten, but you also are a mixture of act and potency. For example, you have the potency to be strong, but you're not. Anytime something changes you, it's actualizing a potency in you. Anytime a change happens, you have one thing actualizing another, but you can't go back forever, so eventually you need to go back to an unactualized actualizer, which we call God.
There you go.
God has the potential to create the universe. There you go. He cannot be all actual.
God has the potential to become man and die on the cross before the universe was made.
Right?
If you say that God is only actualized, what you're saying is that God has no further capability. That he
No
is
potential.
all that he ever will be, and that nothing will change. That's the problem with putting yourself in this argument of actualized versus unactualized, potential versus actualized, whatever, potency, act, whatever you want to call it, is that by putting yourself in this dynamic box of it's one or the other, then what you're saying is that God is all that he could possibly be, which means that he is not capable of performing acts. You wouldn't say this about anything or anyone, and I don't know any Christian, even in, like, when you look at people like Ben Shapiro, who's talking about, like, an unactualized actualizer, right? He wouldn't define it as an inability to change. He would say that, like, God's nature, I guess, if I were speaking for Ben Shapiro, is like permanent, like that kind of thing. But he would never say that, like, God doesn't have potency. I don't think he would. He might, but to say he doesn't have potency means that God isn't capable of doing anything else, right? Because he is all that he ever would be. So God
I feel like
have the
I feel like Ben
capability-
Shapiro.
Yeah, you say go ahead.
I was gonna say I feel like Ben Shapiro would say that exact thing because he just hasn't thought about it far enough. I remember watching one of his videos when he was responding to an argument about God, and he was saying that Ben Shapiro. I'm not gonna make this about him, but he seems to be even more unqualified to talk about arguments for the existence of God than the other things that he usually focuses on. Like he's extremely poor at making good arguments for God. He's an awful apologist.
Yeah. Well, don't use this unless you like have thought more than a few seconds about it, because if you just divide things up into act and potency, what you're saying is that all God is all God could be, meaning that you're limiting God to all that has currently happened and nothing more. I'm basically saying that anything that happens after, like, literally the exact moment in which you make that expression is not due to God's act or potency. It's due to, like, some random occurrence of events that God has no control over. So, T said, when I was younger, I made Santa Claus make sense to myself. Yeah, I mean, like, people are really good at justifying things that they're, I'm not going to say, like, forced to believe, but perhaps indoctrinated or taught to believe, especially when you're young and impressionable. We tend to, justify and kind of argue our way into believing things. Both AAA and I, as you may or may not be aware, are former Christians. So both of us actually believed in the God that this guy is failing to defend. And it's not like it's ignorance per se, or even, like an unnatural thing by any means to, like, talk yourself into believing something. Especially when, and I'm going to use the term for Santa Claus, apologize, don't crucify me, Christians, if you watch this, but the term, when it has a magical sense to it. So, like, Santa Claus could do things that are not possible, like travel around the world and deliver presents to every boy and girl in one night, right? Like, that's just not a physical possibility. So there's a magical quality to Santa Claus. Also, he, like, descends chimneys and can ascend chimneys and has flying reindeer, stuff like that, And so there's these magical qualities that we're kind of engulfed in because it gives us this story of something that we kind of want to believe to be true. We kind of hope that we're rewarded for good acts that we do, and we kind of hope that there's some, maybe not omniscient, but somebody with a naughty and nice list that we're good for to bring us gifts on Christmas, right? So when you, and this isn't to, like, degrade the Christian argument, and I hope people don't take it this way, but, like, when you compare that to something like God, you get a lot of the same themes. You get this omniscient being who will give you an eternal reward in heaven. And it only takes place after you die, so there's really no way to verify it. Versus, like, in, Santa's case, it happens when you're asleep at night, so you're never awake to catch him, that kind of stuff. So, like, there's a lot of similarities, not to degrade Christianity in any way. I'll happily do that in some other method, but not in this case. I'm just trying to make the comparison between, like, a belief in Santa and belief in something like a God isn't really all that different.
Phantom, he said you could say that since God exists outside of time, he has always done every action he will ever do. So he is fully actualized because of that. And so the problem is that some people argue that God exists outside of time, but you also have to say that God exists within time, because the whole Jesus thing.
Yeah,
he's in here doing. He's in time, in space. He was born in Bethlehem or whatever, at that space, and around 4 BC time. He was doing things. So you're going to have to get rid of the Jesus part in order to fully make this argument. Yeah. As well as parts of the Old Testament theophanies and stuff, when Jesus enters space and time and starts interacting with people, he's doing things.
Yeah, or Christophanies, in which Jesus appears to people like Paul, or we assume that Jesus appears to people like Paul, and stuff like that, where we have a definitive timeline of events that can only happen in the time frame of humanity. Like, they have to fall in this certain framework of time. So God himself may exist outside of time, but he made himself circumstance to time when he was born and became Jesus, right? Like, that's just a thing that you have to rectify.
God is the being that's pure act, meaning he is everything that he possibly could be. This means he must be eternal, because if he's not eternal, that means he has the potential to not exist. But there is no potential in God, so that means God...
There's no potential in God. Mark that down, guys. God has no potential.
Maybe no potential anymore.
Yeah, there's nothing he could do.
Right.
Because he has no potential.
Yeah.
Just like all the teachers that had us when we were growing up together, they looked at us and said we had no potential.
God must always exist. Also, if God is everything he could be, he's also all-powerful because he cannot change. And that
And again,
That's a non
very
sequitur.
problematic.
Yeah, just because you're everything you could be doesn't mean you're all powerful.
Or that
I
you
mean,
can't
like,
change.
right? I could be everything. I'm not everything I could be, but if I was, that wouldn't mean that I'm all powerful.
Yeah.
But
I mean, like, I'm not everything that I could be in the sense that I could go and get plastic surgery to have wings augmented onto my back,
right,
but that doesn't, you know.
that I don't know how he pulled that one out of his ass for real.
Yeah,
That I didn't even
was a rough
follow.
one.
means nothing else could possibly do anything to God. This argument
Nothing can do anything to God, but that ignores Jesus pretty
Or,
hard.
or could we make him angry?
Yeah.
That's
Could the
doing something.
actions of humans make him feel regret?
The Bible seems to think so.
Yeah.
argument's the most complicated. It's originally from Aristotle, and it's also used by Thomas Aquinas in Summa Contra Gentiles. Pascal's wager is much simpler, and it's more of a thought experiment than an argument. Let's say you're an atheist, and atheism turns out to be correct. Nothing happens after you die. Well then, you don't really gain or lose anything, it's just kind of neutral for you. But let's say you're an atheist, and it turns out you're wrong, and God is real, then it could be very bad for you. Now let's say you believe in God, and it turns out atheism is correct, well then you still don't gain or lose anything, it's just neutral. But if you believe in God and God is real, then you could gain everything. So between these two possibilities, which one do you want to bet on? This one gives you a much better chance, so it's better for you to believe in God.
So the problem with this one, it's not even an argument for God. It's really just an argument for belief. That's one problem. The really big one is that you could just insert anything here. Like you could just insert any type of God. Perhaps there's a God that values not working on Tuesdays. And so if you don't work on Tuesdays, hey, you could just work, you could just work on a Saturday and Sunday and make up for that. Right. But if you do work on Tuesdays and there is a God that's actually angry about that, oh, the consequences can be dire. Like you could just do this for anything.
Yeah.
And
Really
and
good
not even just with any God, like anything. Like I could say, like my car outside. I could make the argument there could be a bomb in it. If I were to act like there's a bomb in it, then I'm going to be safe. But if I act like there's not a bomb in it and there actually is, then I'll die. Right? The another flaw is that the assumption is that there's no consequences for being wrong. There are consequences for being wrong. For one, I can't use my car. If we use God here, you fundamentally change your life. The things that you may have done, the people you would have met, the career choices, like they've all been changed because of the decision that's to follow God. I mean, Facade and I can both speak to this. We went to a specific schools, choosing specific careers, did certain things in college and refrained from other certain things based off of that belief. To say that there was no cost to it is just nonsense.
Yeah, Phantom says perhaps there's a God that values atheists. Yeah, I mean,
Right.
there's
That's
potentially a
really
God
right.
that values people that are more logical than others.
Mm-hmm.
And people that tend to be, or that is more skeptical to be in the more atheist framework, if you will, than others. So, like, if there's a God that values skepticism, we might be granted some sort of pardon if there is an eternity and he's judging us for it because we're skeptical in our life, right? Whereas somebody that's more prone to believe something might not get that pass. So where he has this nice little 2x2 chart that he pulls up and is like, well, you're much better in this column on the right than the one on the left. I challenge, if you happen to have access to Microsoft Excel, pull it up and just start scrolling down until you get to the bottom. And then fill in every one of those blocks, going from top left to bottom right with some option of just anything you want. I like the color red, or I don't like the taste of grapefruit. And you just fill in anything you want. Literally, it could be anything. And then picture that there's a God that values those things until you run out of space. What's going to end up happening before you run out of space is your computer's not going to be able to handle how many spots you're putting in there. But it's not a 2x2 grid anymore. It's literally just a, let's throw a dart at the board, and there could be some deity that has this value.
The teleological argument says that stuff in the universe seems to have a purpose, so that means the universe must have had a designer. If you found a machine lying around, you would assume that somebody designed the machine. So the teleological argument tries to argue that the universe works like a machine, so somebody must have designed the universe. Things in nature, like the human cell or the ecosystem of the world, are very complex and they work like a machine. Now, Darwinian evolution can explain why that is, but there's also things Darwinian evolution can't explain, like the 4 constants of the universe. There are physical constants, like the gravitational constant and the electron charge, the strong nuclear force and the weak nuclear force, that are perfectly fine-tuned, such that if they were even the slightest bit different...
Yeah.
So, before we get to the teleological argument, he says something that is just boneheadedly stupid. He says Darwinian evolution can't describe the universal constants. Like Darwinian evolution can't prescribe gravity or the weak interaction. Why, in the name of common sense, would you expect a theory that explains how genetic traits propagate throughout populations? Why would you expect that to explain the laws of physics? It's like saying, oh, my cell phone is useless, I can't drive it to work. Like it tells me he just doesn't know what evolution is. But
doesn't understand that like there's literally any other explanation to something scientific other than the theory of evolution.
Right.
Like it's just
right.
Oh well, the theory of it's not the theory of evolution, it's the theory of everything. It solves all problems
Right.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Throw your math books out the window, study evolution.
Uh-huh.
Throw your philosophy books out the window, study evolution. Don't worry about trying to understand gravitational pull and like things like how the moon impacts tides on Earth. Study evolution and you'll know that. Even though that has nothing to do with evolution, it's literally all about gravity.
Also, so his argument when he talks about the fine-tuning thing, we brought this up on the show, and fine-tuning arguments work best for gods that are powerful but not omnipotent, because to say that something is fine-tuned suggests that there are rules that govern the way God can create things. If he's truly omnipotent, then God isn't concerned about the mass of an electron. He isn't concerned about the distance of the Earth to the sun. He's concerned about the speed of light. It doesn't matter what these values are. It doesn't matter how big the electron is. He can create life.
Yeah, he's not wrong about what Darwinian evolution can't explain. No, he's absolutely right.
Yeah, he's right on.
He's spot on the money.
Yeah, he got that right.
I think anyone with any basic knowledge of science and physics would agree that Darwinian evolution will not explain the constants of the universe.
No.
He does get that part right.
He also at the beginning he talked about how a cell and how it operates like a factory or something. Like that's a machine or whatever. So like this is a logical fallacy. It's called an argument from analogy. It says this thing is like this other thing, so it must also have the same properties or same origin. Like I can say a apple is like a computer in that they're both made of atoms. And a computer was made in a factory, therefore apple was made in a factory. Or I can say apple's like a computer in that they're both made of atoms, and an apple grew on a tree, therefore a computer grew on a tree. Like there's, you see how it works both ways. You can do this with anything. I mean, there's no two things that I could think of that couldn't be compared in some way. That's why argument from analogies don't work. Saying that they share some characteristics doesn't tell you anything about either of their origins or how they work or the mechanics or anything like that. So that's a problem. Also, he doesn't seem to, the way he recognizes design. And I don't want to jump ahead, but I think was he going to say complexity?
He mentioned complexity already, and how like the cell is complex and the universe is complex and all that fun stuff.
Right. And so complexity is not how you determine whether something's designed, because there are both design and undesigned things that are complex and not complex. So this
Yeah,
is
and
so that was the
I
argument.
was gonna point this out, and I'll get to Phantom's comment here in a second. But he mentions right here when he's talking about fine tuning that if things were just slightly off in any direction, that the universe would be torn asunder. But like we kind of know that that's not true, at least to the extent of like gravitational constant. Like we know what the gravitational constant is, but it's really a descriptive thing that we're doing here. We're not prescribing it to some like definite this has to be this way. Like we're just saying this is what it is observed in the universe. Like what is it, 9.8 meters per second per second? Is that the gravitational constant? Something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, like
Also, we know that the four laws seem to, at least three of them seem to be related, and like they can be combined with heat. Like you go to a certain temperature, electromagnetic and electromagnetism and the weak interaction combine into one force. And then if you keep going up in temperature in temperature, then a strong interaction will do the same. And we believe that if you were to keep going up, gravity would also, which is what the state was at the Big Bang. So these cosmic absolutes or whatever, the laws of physics, they seem to be related. So it's possible that by changing one, you would change the other and it
by
would still
virtue you
balance.
change the other, but by like for instance, a good way to kind of think about it is like if we have, four bottles of water kind of tucked into a pool. If we take an overflow one, it's just gonna fall out into the pool and still balance with the rest of the water in the pool. Like it, and if you, kind of change one or you increase the one over here, what's likely to happen is the other three will also, like if you think of them as balloons, you increase one in size, the other three might slightly decrease in size to just adjust to the
Right.
one, right? Like that's just
Right.
kind of what we think is, and kind of when you start looking at things like the Big Bang or the singularity, right? We as he was talking about, we go increase in heat, but we also increase in density. So we get to this incredibly dense, incredibly hot combination of these four forces, and then as it starts to cool, you get space between, atoms and molecules. They start to separate into their own individual constants, if you will. And so that's kind of where we think they came from.
Yeah, this guy just don't know shit about science. But
Fine-tuning argument fails until you can prove to me that the something intended the universe to be in its current state. Yeah, I mean, that's a really good way to just simplify and look at this argument, is that you'd have to prove intention for the way the state of the universe is. And all we have been able to do, and all that we can confirm, is that it is the way it is, which is, it's a thought-ending thing. Big Bang. People still believe in pseudoscience. Ah. Hi, Arcad. Welcome to the chat. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call it pseudoscience, given that we have a lot of scientific support for the theory. It's the best
Archive.
current theory. And if you'd like to present an alternate theory to the Big Bang as the origin of the universe, you're more than welcome to come on the show. We can have discussion and see which one holds more water.
I'll post the email in the chat. You can also like name whatever thing you think is pseudoscience as well.
Yeah, I mean, I assume you think Big Bang is pseudoscience. I'd love to hear like what alternative you have to the origin of the universe and like what scientific evidence you have to support it. since you think that the Big Bang is pseudoscience, if you could post some like academic journals of whatever theory you think is the best, and perhaps you're a multiverse enthusiast. Although I will say that we don't have good science to support it as of yet. We do have some math that's very, very promising for multiverse theory.
Also, I put an email in the chat, so hit us up, come on the show, and we can talk about how the Big Bang is definitely not pseudoscience. We know what happened. We have really good evidence for it. Really, really, really good evidence for it.
Yeah.
Different, the entire universe would immediately collapse in on itself.
Yeah, see?
The ontological argument says God exists because of the way he is. Bruh. No, seriously. God is defined as that than which nothing greater can be conceived. That means God must be all-powerful, because being all-powerful is greater than having limited power. God must...
This goes on for way longer than it should. Do you want to let it play out before we reply?
Sure, I was gonna jump into it. He says God's the way he is by definition. So defining something in such a way does not mean that that thing exists. Like I can say your wizards example that you use every time somebody bring up this definition argument, right? You could say a wizard is a being that is the prerequisite for God. It is by definition a non-God, by definition not all-powerful. It's just a prerequisite for God. That means God had a cause.
Yeah.
By definition.
By definition, God's cause is wizards because they are a necessary prerequisite for God's existence if we can just define things the way we want to define them.
Right.
And that
Your
makes it so.
Your definitions have no impact on reality. You can define whatever you want. It doesn't mean that reality does a thing to follow it. That's nonsense.
Phantom says, I believe in the big crackle. I don't know if you've heard of the theory, and I don't know where AAA stands on it, but of the big bounce. But that's a pretty interesting theory if you haven't looked into that at all. But it basically says that like the universe will, it is currently expanding faster and faster and faster, and it will get to the point where the universe will ultimately recede upon itself and potentially form back into a singularity before it then happens all over. Which is pretty cool. Interesting theory. The universe will eventually turn back into a singularity if you believe the big bounce.
Because being all-knowing is greater than having limited knowledge. God must be all-good, because being all-good is greater than being flawed. And God must exist, because existing is greater than not existing. Wait, just because we can think of a greatest possible being doesn't mean it actually exists. Well, actually it does, because existing in reality is greater than just existing in the mind. Okay, but I could use that to...
So, by this, it does, therefore my wizards necessarily exist. Like the
also, he needed to define what he mean by greater. This reminds me of the episode we have with the guy you invited. I forget his name again.
Which one?
But the greatest possible being.
Oh, the greatest conceivable being?
Yeah, the greatest conceivable. Well, he was saying the truth is God, and what was it? And but he wouldn't define what truth was. No, he wouldn't define what greatest was. I forget his name. The guy you found on Facebook.
Angel.
No, he's came on 3 times. That we should worship truth.
It'll come to me in just a second. I saw
this
picture earlier.
Yes, but he wouldn't define, because I remember asking him. I was like, "You have rock, paper, scissors. Which one's the greatest?" And he was like, "Oh, they're all the greatest." I'm like, but that can't be because paper objectively beats rock. So, but I mean, there's so many. Phantom, he says, I have a lot to prove that there are 31 gods, of which none can be greater because they're all 31 flavors of ice creams. Baskin Robbins.
Bryce.
Yeah, Bryce. That's yes. We need to get him back on the show.
Yeah, and by the way, like this is like the greatest possible pizza argument is also like the problem that we have. Another problem that we have with like the greatest conceivable being is that what makes something great is kind of subjective because, like, on 3, I'm going to count to 3. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. When I say the word 3, I want you to tell me your favorite pizza topping, or the greatest pizza topping. You ready? 1, 2, 3. Meatballs.
Pepperoni.
Yeah, you see? The greatest pizza topping is undoubtedly meatballs, but you said it's
Who
undoubtedly
the fuck puts
pepperoni.
meatballs on a pizza though?
The answer is anyone that has good sense.
Okay.
Next time you go get a pizza, you get meatballs on it. You let me know.
Meatballs on it? All right.
Yeah. It's good. But the point here is that I knew he wasn't going to say meatballs. I also knew that, like, we were going to undoubtedly say something different. The whole point is, like, if we're talking about what's the best pizza topping, or if we're talking about what's the best ice cream flavor at Baskin-Robbins, you notice there's a lot of subjectivity there. Like, if I define God as the greatest conceivable being, and by greatest, I mean the capability of destroying the most humans, like, that's a pretty nuanced definition, but, you know. Italian sausage is good too, Phantom. I'm with you on that.
Well, it at least makes sense to put Italian sausage on pizza, not meatballs.
Oh, really?
But I digress.
What would you say that Italian sausage is?
Is it a meatball?
It's kind of meat, and it's kind of ball-shaped. It's just small.
No. Nothing in the shape of a ball on a pizza.
Yeah, you'd rather have a sliced phallic shape. I gotcha.
Right. What I was gonna say was he said earlier, he said that God is perfection and being perfect is greater than having flaws. Right. And so the problem is depending on how you define great, because I could say I'm a greater sinner than God.
Yeah, I mean,
if that is the metric, I would definitely be greater.
I am.
So that's you have to define this.
Committing crime. Like,
right. Yeah.
Like, argue for the existence of the greatest possible pizza. Well, actually, no, you can't, because the definition of pizza implies limitations, like a limited size and able to be...
But it doesn't, because I can define pizza as something that has unlimited size, and it therefore must exist, according to his own argument.
Right. You can define a pizza as the prerequisite for God.
Be broken. If you had a pizza that was indestructible, eternal, all-powerful, and infinitely large, it wouldn't be a pizza anymore. It would just be God. Basically, if your pizza gets infinitely great, it'll turn into God. There is also the argument from personal experience. It may sound silly.
This is also called personal credulity.
But everyone does see the world through the lens of their own personal experience. A lot of people are convinced God exists either because of supernatural events they...
Phantom said, if God is perfect, I'm greater at self-improvement. Yeah.
There you go. There you go.
If God is if God is all-knowing, I'm greater at learning.
Right. True.
Seen or because of answered prayers or just coincidences in their life.
And this is gonna sound terrible, but I'm gonna say it anyway. If this is your reason for believing in God, I sincerely hope that you take a few minutes to determine, or to try to determine, how you think these things are from your God specifically. So, for instance, if you think that your God has answered your prayers, how do you know it was God? And how do you know it was your God that did those things? And the same thing for, like, supernatural events, and I guess coincidence is by definition coincidence, but that means it's not an experience of God by definition. It's an experience of coincidence. But nonetheless,
Well, when you were talking about answered prayer, so it's always a hilarious verse to be is in Matthew 18, 19 and 20. It says, again, I say to you that if two of you agree on earth concerning anything that they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am in the midst of them. This means that there have never been any 2 Christians to ever pray for world peace or to end world hunger or any of that stuff because it hasn't happened.
Solve the cure for cancer. Like,
Right. All you need is 2 Christians to do it.
yeah, maybe
And it's
3.
done.
Maybe 3, but still.
Right. Yeah. Come on, guys.
So this is very good at convincing oneself that God exists, but not very good at convincing other people.
I actually agree with this statement. Personal credulity is something that is just that. It's very personal. I don't think it's a good argument to convince others of your God. And a lot of people ask me now, and other atheists, I'm sure, is why bother arguing? If you don't believe in God, why do you have a show like this? Or why does the Atheist Experience and these other shows exist? Why bother arguing? And there's a couple reasons that I've seen given, and my personal is that may be different from those. But like I will point out that if you're so confident it shouldn't bother you, and then B, if you're so convinced that you can do it, why not have the ability to convince others, right? And then the real big thing is that if you want me to believe that I'm going to go to hell when I die, and that's what you're telling me, that's the land that you have for sale, and you think that if I'm going to go to hell if I don't believe, that's pretty important because that impacts a lot more than anything I'll ever do. And that is why I would like to know if I'm wrong, but I have yet to be convinced.
Also, I mean, the huge rise in Christian nationalism, I think that makes it a big, deal to discuss. And like, fortunately, Christians today usually aren't as violent as they have been, throughout, the centuries.
Yeah.
But that's again something to worry about. So yeah, I may not believe that their God exists, but his followers can do some real damage to civilization and to me personally, So yeah, there's a good reason to worry about that stuff.
Phantom said, God is a pedant. 2 Christians prayed, but they were nanoseconds off on their prayers, or God was like denied.
Yeah, right. I was kind of like in Dragon Ball Z when he had to perform, but they had to do it at the same time in the same movement.
Do it at the same time with the same movement.
Missed. Yeah.
The transcendental argument basically says without God, nothing can make sense at all. There's a lot of things we assume, but we can't prove. We assume that logic works. We assume that there's consistency in the natural world. We assume that truth exists, but we can't prove any of these things scientifically.
I hold fast a little bit on the consistency of nature being proved, in that, like, we have consistency in nature documented, and we can make predictions off of it that can come true. So, like, I'm not saying that, like, tomorrow I might wake up and gravity will be gone. Sure, I guess that's technically possible. I'm just saying that, like, I could make a prediction that if I plant, water, and nurture a seed, it will eventually become into the adult form of the plant that I planted, right? Like, that's a pretty good bet on nature and consistency. Like, if I plant an acorn, it's very, very unlikely it's going to grow up to be a pine tree.
Scientifically, because these are the basic assumptions we need to make to even do science. All of these things make sense if we presuppose a worldview where God exists, because then we can say all these other things are grounded in the mind of God. But if God doesn't exist, then we have no justification for the things we assume, and everything just collapses. There is the argument from the...
Yeah, that's this presuppositionalism again.
Yeah.
And we kind of talked about this on the show. Like he said at the beginning, and then he said something like without God, then nothing can be true. He says, what was the exact verbiage he used?
The very beginning of this is like, without God, nothing makes sense.
Nothing makes sense, right? And like, so there's ton. I guess I have to know exactly what he means by make sense. Like for me, making sense would mean just something that's coherent. So it's not necessarily true. It's just there was the coherent thought, right? And so you have that without a God. Like if I just say there's no God, that's right. That's what the state would be. That there's nothing incoherent about that. There's no contradiction. So
Yeah, I mean, also, like, I get the point of, like, trying to say, like, we assume logic works, but we also can prove that logic works by removing logic and seeing how things quickly fall apart. Like, if you want to see,
yeah, well,
like,
you can't get anywhere without it.
yeah, if you want to see how logic works, start ignoring it, and then you see how quickly things just, like, especially the three fundamental laws of logic, so identity, excluded middle, and non-contradiction. If you just start throwing those out the window, like, there's no, like, literally, without identity, you can't determine, identify, or distinguish anything from anything else.
Including the law of identity. Like, you refute the law of identity. What did you refute? Identity. What did you refute? Identity. What? Like, I'm sorry, that doesn't make any sense. But matter of fact, we did that to a guy on the show. He was trying to describe things. He was saying like God was the prerequisite of the law of identity, and we're like, okay, so there's no identity yet. There's just God. Cool. What is there? And then like we did that to try to explain the point.
That identity is necessary. Like, if you're going to identify God, or you're going to say that anything is anything, like God exists, you need to have existence, which has to be identified, and God, which has to be identified. Both of those things need to be identified before they can exist.
Yep.
The mind, or consciousness, which says consciousness cannot be explained naturally.
Agreed, 100%. Stop there while you're ahead.
Generally, the atheist explanation of consciousness is that our brain is just a very advanced biological machine, but unlike our minds, machines can be reduced to their parts. Now, our brain can be reduced to its brain cells, but that's not the same as the experience of consciousness. For example, you could find a part of our brain that sees the color yellow, but that's not the same as the experience of seeing yellowness. You cannot study consciousness scientifically because one can only observe one's own consciousness. For example, there is no way to know if we all see the same colors. Who knows, maybe yellow looks like this to me. For all you know, you could be the only person.
Yeah, solipsism is a different problem.
I'm still trying to figure out how he gets to God here.
Yeah.
So
like
how does he know that your experience of yellow is the same experience as mine? And I would say it probably isn't.
Yeah, I'd also like to point out, and I don't know if it was intentional or not, but yellow and purple are kind of opposite on the addition color of wheel of color, if you will. Not the subtractive wheel of color, by the way, which that purple toothpaste might try to make you believe. It doesn't actually turn it off. Like, it doesn't turn yellow invisible if you put purple over it. That's not a real thing. But that's subtractive colors, not additional colors, which is what you do when you add color on top of another color like purple and yellow. But I would say that, like, there are studies that can help us determine, like, what one finds the most yellow. We also have definitive definitions of, like, where yellow falls on the color spectrum as far as its wavelength. So there are scientific ways to study some of these things. I agree there's no way for people to determine, but I will say as we start to map the neural network of our brains, we start to see how brains kind of compartmentalize and then identify and then experience these things. And we can falsely stimulate those parts of the brain to make you believe that that's what's happening, which is pretty neat.
Who exists. A single atom is not conscious. Two atoms are not conscious. A bunch of atoms are not conscious. So even if you have a complex system, it's still just a complex arrangement of atoms which are not conscious. So where does consciousness come from? So this isn't exactly an argument for God, but it is an argument for the human soul because it shows you need something immaterial to explain consciousness.
So he does not understand emergent properties. So he was like, the atom isn't conscious, the molecules aren't conscious. He kept going up, these things isn't conscious. But then when you put it together, you get consciousness. Yeah, so you're going to say hydrogen, if this hydrogen atom isn't conscious, this hydrogen atom isn't helium. This hydrogen atom isn't helium. You put them together, it's helium. Yes, it's an emergent property. That's how things work in the universe. This isn't this isn't even a problem philosophically. Like this is it's just a well-known thing that, and again, it shows you that I guess he's about as adept in philosophy as he is in science. He's just unaware of arguments.
Comments that I'd address. He said he was listening to a guy the other day, and he said God can violate the laws of logic, just like at the Trinity. Yeah, I'd love to have like a full-out conversation of how the Trinity is supposed to work, because especially if you ask about like specifically God the Father versus God the Son, Jesus. Because you would say that, like, there are definitive things that you need to have the definition of God as we know it in the Christianity world, or Christendom. Don't know why that word left me, but in Christendom. For instance, you would say that God has no beginning, kind of like how he argued earlier, but Jesus definitely does have a beginning, right? Like, Jesus, the Son, became flesh. The Bible uses the word became flesh. The word became flesh and dwelt among us, right? Jesus definitely has a beginning. Jesus also dies, and you would say that God cannot die. So, like, I'd really like to see how these are identified as the same person, if you will. And I really enjoy having that conversation, because the more you start delving into it, the more, I'm not going to say confused the other person gets, or the interlocutor gets, but the more they start to realize it gets less and less rational, because you can't give the same definitions to two beings that are so obscurely different. Sorry, obtusely, I said obscurely. And then Phantom said, I can reduce my car to its part, but each is not therefore a car. What is he talking about? Yeah, I mean, exactly the point here is, oh, I have one tire, and that's not a car. And I have 2 tires, and that's not a car. 3 tires, 4 tires, and it's still not a car. Yet my car has 4 tires. Therefore, you know, at some point, if I keep putting the parts together, you know, I automatically, magically have this car thing, right? Well, no. I mean, you could take the back seat out of my car, and it's still a car, right? Like, so it's not about its collective of parts. It's about what its function is when it's in its collective state, right? That's literally how the brain works, and that's how we define consciousness. It's what the brain is doing in its current collective state. Consciousness. That is what the brain does. Much like how the heart pumps blood. Like, at no point are we saying, like, oh, if I, you know, take this part of the heart out, it's no longer functioning as the heart. Like, no, that's just not the way it works. Just like a brain, if you take part of it out, it's just going to be a deprecated brain. Like, it works the same way.
There's also a huge argument from ignorance. She's saying because we don't understand how consciousness works, it has to be the soul. Like, I can take my computer to some remote tribe, and they can say, and the tribe is like, oh, we don't know how this computer works. The computer must have a soul because it's blinking and shit. Like, that's not how things work.
Yeah, and he said Adam isn't conscious, so he's not a panpsychist. Yeah, I guess you could say that.
I mean, if he's a Christian, probably not.
Probably not.
Then there's the argument from mathematics, which says there's an infinite reality higher than our physical universe. So basic math isn't all that special. For example, the number 5 corresponds to 5 apples, and 5 times 3 corresponds to 3 groups of 5 apples. But the more you get into advanced math, the more math starts to get disconnected from our world, but it still works. For example, there's real numbers, which are numbers that correspond
Not if I'm doing it, it don't.
to real things. But there's also imaginary numbers that are just as mathematically real, but they don't correspond to the real world, which is why they're not called real numbers. But they still exist mathematically, even though they don't exist in the real world. Let's look at the 5 most important numbers in mathematics. 1 is obviously important because it's the basis for all real numbers. 0 is very important because it's necessary for doing algebra. I is very important because it's the basis for all imaginary numbers. E is very important for doing exponential functions, and pi is necessary for doing math with circles. Now, all these numbers are seemingly unrelated to each other, but they fit together beautifully in this equation called Euler's identity. It was discovered by Euler, one of the greatest mathematicians in history, and he saw this as proof that math was designed by God. Also, Euler was a devout Calvinist. More evidence that math has a designer is the Mandelbrot set, which is generated by a very simple equation in the complex plane, but it produces infinite detail. You can keep zooming in on this shape and it will keep generating more and more complexity, even though nobody designed this. The Mandelbrot set is infinite, and it's not found anywhere in our universe, so that
I'm gonna steelman this. It's not found
Where's
anywhere.
his argument? But I wait for you still, man. It sounded like to me he's like, here's this advanced math theory. This really smart mathematician believes there was evidence of God. Therefore, was evidence of God. That's what I got. But I'm gonna go ahead. Let's hear you still, man.
I was just gonna steelman the Mandelbrot set. He says it's not from our
Okay.
universe. He probably means by this that it's not found naturally occurring in our universe. Mandelbrot is named after the mathematician who founded it, Mandelbrot, and he just found, much like pi, it's an seemingly infinite number of continuation. So just like when you do like another really not not complex one, but n+1 is probably one of the most easy mathematical formulas that we've ever come across. So we take any number and we add 1. You can do that ad infinitum, by the way, and get a different number. So no matter what number you choose, if you do n+1, you get a new number. And if you were to graph this, not even on the complex plane, but on a 2-dimensional graphing paper, if you choose, as long as you're choosing a different number and you do n+1, you're always going to get a new result, right? So just like the Mandelbrot set, you're just getting a different result because it seemingly has no repetition, like pi. Like there is no... unlike when you divide something like 3 divided by 10, you get 3.333 ad infinitum. Versus something like pi is 3.14159, but there is no repetition in pi. It doesn't get to the point where you're ever going to come back and hit that same loop of 0.159, etc., etc. So the Mandelbrot is much the same way, and when he says it's not from our universe, I think he just means it's not found naturally occurring. But to be perfectly fair, neither is pi. Pi is not naturally occurring. It's a mathematical formula to help express the function of circles. So
that means whatever created it must also be infinite and not from our universe.
Mandelbrot. He's not.
Well, hold on. He says A has properties, therefore whatever created it must also have the same properties. How did you get that? He says, okay, so the whatever this math thing is, as he says, is infinite and not part of the universe. Therefore, whatever created it is also infinite, not part of the universe. Like, how much sense does that make? Like my car is 2,000 pounds and made of metal. Therefore, the person who made it is 2,000 pounds and made of metal. This is silly. I'm bald. Therefore, my mother and father are also bald. These are just bad arguments.
Yeah.
I'd like to get them on the show and just talk about how stupid arguments are.
The Mandelbrot set was first defined and drawn by Robert W. Brooks and Peter Matelski in 1978 as part of a study of Kleinian groups. In 1980, Benoit Mandelbrot obtained high-quality visualizations of the set while working at IBM's Thomas J. Watson Research Center in Yorktown Heights, New York. In case you guys were curious, IBM and Watson is still an ongoing project. So even in the 1980s, as you may or may not recall, depending on how much you like Jeopardy, Watson was the name of the IBM computer that won Jeopardy over humans probably like 10 years ago now, indicating that the first rise of, not necessarily AI as it is, but AI defeating humans in a contest of pure knowledge and wit. Not the first, not the last time that ever happened. IBM also built Deep Blue, the world's best chess playing computer, and several other machines that are just good at beating humans at things that we seem to be good at. And then was that a ad hominem at Euler for being a Calvinist? Yeah, kind of. Kind of was, because just because a mathematician believed in God and was a Calvinist and came up with Euler's formula, doesn't give much credence to the existence of God, in my opinion. However, if you've never seen one, I'm gonna throw it up on the screen while we're talking, and I'm gonna mute this and ignore this ad. But if you've never seen Euler's disk in motion, highly recommend it. You check it out. This is called Euler's disk, and you'll see precession happen to the point where the disk is literally vibrating back and forth at such a rapid rate that it seems that it's speeding up and anyway getting to the point of plane. Pretty interesting. But yeah, those were the arguments for God, all of them, and we debunked all of them without question or concern. And, that's the end
Were
of the
there
debate.
any that you thought were almost convincing, or?
No, I mean, I think the undoubted best argument for God, at least as far as my 2 cents is concerned, is the cosmological argument, and I think that's still a far cry from a good argument for God.
Yeah, because it's just an argument for you talking about the Kalam in general,
Yeah.
like specifically. Yeah, because it's the argument for the cause. Now, I would say, yeah, that argument has the fewest obvious fallacies in it.
Yeah, I agree.
Um,
And that's why I'd say it's like the strongest argument for God, if you will.
yeah.
This is from Grand Illusions. This is not an illusion by any means. You can buy one of these things. They're not all that expensive, but it's a heavy disc, and as you can see, as it processes, I wish. And there's a one from Ding, D-I-N-G, which is the same people that made Vsauce. He does one where he makes a mark on it, and you can see how fast it's spinning at this point, which is pretty neat.
Mm-hmm.
But even now, it's not quite flat. It just ended up flat and laid down. But Euler's disk. So there you go. Same Calvinist guy that he tried to argue made God, or agreed with God. Just named after that same guy. Yeah. Other question, other things? Did we miss anything?
Not that I know of. Next week, I still got to finalize with Wes to see exactly when he's going to come on, but he'll be on really soon. More than likely next week sometime. We're going to try to get him on Tuesday at 6:15 ish. We're kind of pushing back a little bit because changing our schedules and everything. So
the fact that I work until 6 o'clock doesn't help.
yeah, that. It's Fasad's fault.
It is my fault. If so interested, the channel video that we were watching is from Redeemed Zoomer. I think AAA will add the link to that video in the description. Fine tuning, I don't think is a great argument for several reasons we pointed out. I do think cosmologically in general, and not because of like necessarily infinite regression, but because of the illusion of design and or intention makes you think about it the most. I think that's my reason for I say the cosmological is the best. Fine tuning is actually quite full of holes. So,
and especially the fact that usually the people who make the fine tuning argument believe their God to be omnipotent, and that's when it really just falls apart.
Yeah, I mean, like on top of the fact that like finely tuned means that it's adjusted, and an infinite God wouldn't need to adjust. it's also just a large assumption that things have to be the way they are, and I think that falls into David Hume's mud puddle argument pretty easily, which is, oh, I'm water in this hole, therefore this mud puddle was made just for me. Well, the universe just kind of is. We've described it, and we exist on it, but if we want to really look at it, 99.99998% of all life that has ever existed on the universe has gone extinct. It's not really fine-tuned for life if you think about it. There have been more organisms that have died since the beginning of your life on Earth than you'll ever know. Like, it's just the way it works. Everything from cells to bugs and everything in between. Just constant death. Like, if it's fine-tuned, we probably could use a tune-up. No, Hume actually posed the mud puddle experiment, if I'm not mistaken, and Adams just referred.
I think he's right. I think it was Douglas Adams.
Was it? I thought
Yeah,
I
think
had it the
so.
other way around.
All right.
Could be incorrect. I would Google it, but I don't have much screen space left from all the things I'm running.
Yeah, I'm Googling. The first thing I'm seeing is just Douglas Adams talking. That's my first thing I found. First cursory check. I mean, maybe Hume said something before then.
Yeah, well, apologies if I incorrectly associated it with Hume.
No, David Hume said something about it too. So maybe Douglas Adams was just referring to Hume when he said it. Yeah, I think Douglas Adams was referring to Hume. I don't know.
I thought that was the case as well. In any case, whether it was Douglas Adams or David Hume,
The point remains, regardless who it is.
The mud puddle argument and the argument for fine tuning is often like in juxtaposition. Is that we see something, we think it's designed for such, and therefore it must be made for such, and that's the case of the mud puddle. That's the case that we have with literally everything that we've ever looked at. And I often give the example of, like, we look at a stick that's been sharpened to a point, and then all of a sudden it's a spear. It must have been designed that way. Well, no, we're just using it that way. That's its function. That's not its design, right? Like, we've designed it as humans when we make it pointy to stab things, but even if you find a naturally pointy stick, it's not designed that way. Like, it's, you know, like, it may have a function as such, but that's not its design.
I got nothing else.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that covers it. If you guys, hopefully the audio's much better this time from the precursors of doing some testing. I would say that it went better. Hopefully it's not. I mean, I don't think either of us have Morgan Freeman-esque voices in which people want to listen to us for hours on end, but at least the quality is better here. So.
Well, guys, thanks for tuning in. Hoping to get back to our regular debates, and then I just found the videos released shortly here. And we will see you soon. Double salute.
Double salute.
Double salute. That's not a thing.